Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. And today, for the first time in a long while, we'll actually be covering a series that isn't Hunter x Hunter. Never fear though, because there is a metric ton of that content coming up soon. But for today, I wanted to talk about my experience with Jojo. Now, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure is one of those things that countless amounts of people have always been trying to get me to read or watch, for I feel like about as long as I can remember. But I've always been kind of put off by what I've seen from it out of context, and let's be real, some of the extreme fans out there do get a bit much. With that said, the time has finally come, and I stand before you here today having engulfed 3 parts of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. And I never thought I'd be saying this, but you got me. I am pretty much 100% converted into this crazy, flamboyant, and surprisingly often dog-murdering world. My god, do I feel bad for every single dog in Jojo, because as soon as one appears, its fate is as good as done. But overall, I'd like to say that I very much enjoyed my time with Jojo thus far, although it has been a very, let's call it a unique experience, I guess. And actually, you know what, for some background, I should say that this is not the first time I've seriously tried to give Jojo a go, because over the years, I've actually tried to get into this series 3 times prior to this. I've tried reading the manga twice, and I've tried watching the David production anime series once before, and every single time, I was just bored to death by part 1. And people had warned me about Phantom Blood, and how you just kind of need to slug through it, but at times I found it to be such a very painful experience. Now granted, this part of the story was first published in the late 1980s? Somewhere around there? So more than 30 years ago, and as much as I should not expect it to stand up to modern storytelling, that is the unfortunate reality of someone trying to start Jojo's Bizarre Adventure in 2020. The comparison is always going to be there. Oh, and you know what, I should actually say before I go any further that this video is almost certainly going to contain spoilers from the first 3 parts of Jojo. So if you're keen on getting into the series and doing it blind, then this is where you might want to stop watching this. But if you have seen or read it or simply don't care, then let's continue, I guess. To me, Phantom Blood just doesn't seem like it knows what it wants to be. It's sort of a mixture between pure horror, a campy comedy, and a classic revenge quest, but neither one of those 3 elements are implemented properly in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. And in fact, they all come to clash with each other quite significantly, leaving me with what I felt was a pile of undeveloped Jojo ooze, which is why I've always stopped reading or watching at some point during this part, because I just get sick of being fed said ooze. And that isn't to say that all of Phantom Blood is bad, it definitely has its moments, and it has its characters. Like, I really enjoyed Baron Zeppeli, he has a cool design, and he was the catalyst for introducing Hamon, which is by far the most interesting aspect of part 1, as well as the least interesting aspect of parts 2 and 3. But it was something here, something very sorely needed. And of course you can't go past characters like Dio or Speedwagon either. But I have had a lot of people tell me that you can just, go ahead and skip part 1, but I'm really glad I didn't, and I don't think you should. And that's because from a storytelling perspective, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a competent piece, I think it's just aged terribly, and it feels very flat compared to almost any manga that the modern day will produce. Almost anything, there are definitely exceptions to that. But I find the idea of skipping it to be ridiculous because it completely sets up the groundwork of part 2, as well as the major antagonist of part 3, and it gives you that very first Jojo connection with Jonathan, who, as much as I dislike him as a protagonist, I have to admit does feel quite nice when you move to Jotaro, and you can really feel that Joe-style legacy behind him. I do dislike Jonathan though, because he's simply boring and really actually depressing to watch. This man is one of the most unfortunate human beings to have ever existed, and it can be genuine torture to just sit there and watch him suffer repeatedly. I mean, the only good thing that actually happens to Jonathan is that he gets married, and then immediately after he gets killed. Such a depressing existence. And he doesn't have a lot of depth of character either, at least not from what I experienced. He's a classical gentleman, and while that's admirable and noble, it's a bit boring as hell. Which is why, when for the first time I got past part 1 and met a young Joseph Joestar, I was beyond relieved. Joseph seemed like the polar opposite of Jonathan. He's loud, brash, and a bit of a dick who needs to be put in his place from time to time. But there we go, something we can work towards, and a person we can have fun with along the way. And with that, we're now in part 2, and I have to say that I really enjoyed Battle Tendency. From the bits and pieces I've heard from other fans, this also seems to be a fairly disliked part of Jojo, and I can only guess that that's because it occurs before the introduction of stands and such, but I loved it. Now, I am willing to accept the possibility that I only loved it so much because I was directly comparing it to Phantom Blood at the time, but part 2 took that weird goop of ideas and techniques of part 1 and actually molded it into a great product. For example, there was a lot of campiness in part 1, but it all seemed to be a bit subconscious and almost unintentional. Meanwhile, part 2 took that flamboyancy to the extreme, and it's really fascinating to see all of the crazy poses that Araki can come up with. And all around, it just generated created this nice layer of levity that was not present in part 1. Battle Tendency also decided to begin exiting the horror genre, which made things into more of an ancient mystery, building upon the Stone Mask stuff and introducing the Pillarmen, who were all fantastic and were really intriguing figures to follow throughout part 2. But the best aspect of all of it is the whole bromance between Caesar and Joseph, especially Caesar because he gave us a really fun character to follow who wasn't Joseph and added a lot of depth to the series as a result, and it was genuinely heartbreaking when he met his bubbly demise. So in the end, I found part 2 to be a really solid piece of story with very compelling characters that built on the legacy of Phantom Blood and left us with a lot of promise for Stardust Crusaders, which I began immediately afterwards. And the mixed feelings here very much continue because part 3 has a lot that I love and some that I really don't. And given that it was such a radical departure from everything that was Jojo at this point, I think that's only to be expected. As for what I loved, let's start with almost literally every character. I feel like by this point Araki has a really super solid mind for designing compelling figures, and the entire main tour group are each fantastic in their own way. Jotaro is definitely my favorite Jojo at this point in time based on design alone, because what about us? But what I will say is that I do wish we'd gotten to know him a bit better. And I suppose to contrast Joseph and Jonathan, Jotaro got the more introverted delinquent personality, which I did really enjoy, but that naturally kind of pushes him into the background for most situations until it was time to bust out Star Platinum and punch some dudes. But to be perfectly honest with you, I feel like a lot of part 3 could just be renamed Polnareff's Bizarre Adventure, because looking back on it, he got so much more time to shine than Jotaro did, and he actually had this incredible character arc involving his sister, Avdol, and even Iggy, who, surprise surprise, is a dog who dies. Thanks a lot for that again, Araki. But to me, Polnareff is the undisputed star of Stardust Crusaders. He has this perfect combination of wacky comedy, gut-wrenching drama, and fantastic action that just makes him this weird all-rounder, who gets so much more of the spotlight than our actual introverted protagonist. Now as for what I didn't like about part 3, or I guess I shouldn't say didn't like, it just took a lot of getting used to, but it was the narrative structure, which completely changed from a continuous story to an isolated episodic format. A monster of the week sort of business. And that just wasn't what I was expecting coming off part 2, so I essentially spent the first half of Stardust Crusaders patiently waiting for the story to start, because every episode or two-part episode had the exact same formula. Our group travels to a place, a stand user is waiting for them. One of the group will notice something weird, but won't tell anyone else because reasons. Shenanigans ensue, and the enemy stand user is defeated. And we go on to do that for an entire deck of tarot cards as well as a set of Egyptian gods. And at times this format did get really tiring for me. Part 3 actually took me a couple of weeks to get through, because after the defeat of every stand user, I wasn't really inspired to watch the next episode because I knew exactly what was going to happen. They were going to spend 1 or 2 episodes in an isolated scenario fighting yet another stand user, and this was not actually going to change until late into the game. But I did come to a point of acceptance because these episodes were genuinely enjoyable to watch once I'd sat down and actually bothered to click play, because these characters can carry anything. And also in the second half of the series, the stands start to become a bit more interesting and not always so combat focused. And in fact, one of my favorite stand conflicts was with the gambler guy who, what's his name, Darby? I think that's it. Because I really enjoyed how stands were being applied on such a micro scale and the drama that was able to be generated from something like a game of poker, which was better than almost all fights in the first half of Stardust Crusaders. As for stands themselves, I generally like them. As they get more and more creative, I suspect I'll come to enjoy them even more, but the first batch of enemy stands that focused almost exclusively on combat got kind of boring, and for a while I found myself really missing Hamon. But by the end of the series though, I was all like, Hamo what? But all of this wacky episodic shenaniganry does go to serve a very important purpose, which is disarming us for the tragic conclusion, which cost the lives of Avdol, Iggy, and Kokyuin. And at each and every single one of these moments, I could tell that I'd really enjoyed part 3, because when these characters left us for good, it felt like my heart had been ripped out and crushed by Star Platinum, especially Iggy. That good boy deserved so much better. But the final conflict between Jotaro and Dio was pretty damn phenomenal, and every use of Zawarudo felt like an oh shit moment in the anime, and I now truly understand that literally 50% of memes on the internet are related to Jojo in some way, shape or form, which is probably my biggest takeaway from this entire experience. Now with that said, I do definitely plan on continuing with parts 4 and 5 because why not? They're there, they're available. I can't say right now whether or not I'll be inspired enough to continue reading the manga from there though, especially since I've heard that the narrative structure stays pretty much the same. It's very much a monster of the week style of storytelling from now until the end of time. Although of course that's just what I've heard. Please do feel free to let me know if I'm wrong in the comments below, although the internet usually does that anyway, as well as if further parts are worth reading. But for now, I feel like a lot of this video is probably focused on criticism, but overall I've really enjoyed my Jojo experience thus far. It's one hell of a unique series, and I do very much look forward to seeing where Araki's madness goes from here. Just stop killing dogs, you sick, sick human being. But that pretty much does it for this rambling stream of consciousness in response to Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produces in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your various thoughts on all things Jojo. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time. You watching Fire Force? By the way, you watch cricket? Oh dear, I have bad answers for you all around, my friend. I did try to watch Fire Force. I even did a couple of episode reviews on it before I realized that weekly reviews were an awful experience to make. But I fell out of it because, I don't know, it just didn't capture me. The art style was great, the characters were generally fun, but it all felt a bit too standard shonen for me. As for cricket, absolutely not. I will watch an infinity of Fire Force before I sit down and have anything to do with cricket. And a lot of fellow Australians think I'm insane for that, because it's effectively our national sport, but it's just so boring. And games can last for days and days and days, and most of the time, it's just people standing around. And I don't know, I'm not a huge sport person in general, except for tennis, the sport of kings. But cricket was never really my jam. I will say that my mum really loves it though, but she primarily uses it as a sleeping aid to take afternoon naps in summer.